What if you could have one wish? Would it still be worth it, even if something bad will happen in return? Tonight, we have 5 stories, from the dark web to deep sea diving and more. A huge thank you to all of tonight's authors for making this video possible. Likes and comments are always appreciated if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I was 7 when she was stillborn and then brought back. I remember sitting outside the glass doors of the maternity ward and hearing someone crying. But it wasn't the wail of my new baby's sister. Looking back on it, it was probably my mother. But I was at that stage of my life when I thought my parents would never cry, so I sat there wondering who it could be. I sat and waited for so long that my yellow Game Boy ran out of charge and shut down. The waiting area had a fluorescent bulb that flickered every once in a while. I stared up at it blankly and counted the flickers. The hours ran late, and I was beginning to nod off when the glass doors finally opened. A high-pitched baby's wail filled the room. My parents came out with big smiles on their faces, holding close a bundle of blankets where my new little sister lay nestled, waving her tiny fists. My mother's belly had shrunk. She looked pale and fatigued, but nothing could compare to the amount of pure joy in her bloodshot eyes. My parents thanked the nurses lingering behind them and picked me up to go home. I remember how the nurses looked terrified, and how as we left the hospital, and my father put the car into gear, shadows of people had crowded around the windows of the maternity ward to stare down at us. Even before my mother told me the story of what happened that night, I could tell Maya was special. She had the brightest blue eyes I had ever seen, and when her little pink head began to grow a fuzz of hair on top, it was silky and so light in color that it bordered blonde and silver. Unlike my unruly mess of brown hair, I struggled to brush every morning. She was pretty in the contagious way a tiny, giggly baby girl could be, and she was a treasure to my mother, who said time and time again that Maya's laughter sounded just like hers when she was a little girl. I sometimes wondered why Maya looked so different from me, but it was only when I turned 11 and Maya was 4 when I cared enough to ask my mother about it. When I did, my mother's expression turned serious. She pulled me into her bedroom, something she never did, and closed the door behind us. Her eyes were resolute, as if she was telling herself, "This is it. I have to do this now." Then she took a deep breath before telling me. "Maya was touched by an angel," she said in a hushed tone. I looked at her incredulously. We went to church every Sunday, where the pastor would talk about things like angels and ghosts, but I was a skeptical 11-year-old with a cynical science teacher, and I had just started to suspect the pastor was full of baloney. "An angel?" I said. "Like, with wings?" My mother's lips pulled into a tight smile. "Angels who come down to earth hide their wings, Rose. They look just like us." I crossed my arms and frowned. "Then how do you know it was an angel?" "She's performed a miracle," my mother said. There was a frozen look in her eyes that scared me a little. "What was the miracle?" I asked, still unconvinced. "She brought your sister back," my mother said. Then she smiled. "My little Maya, she came back to life." I stared at her, disbelieving. My mother seemed to realize what she had said and cleared her throat. Maya giggled out in the hallway, playing with her toys. "Sometimes angels are as fearful as they are magical," she said quickly. "Now go to your room and pray to her. Thank her for bringing Maya back into our arms." I prayed a little more earnestly that night, and the nights after. I wasn't sure why, but the way my mother had spoken struck me as strange and a little frightening. Years passed, and Maya grew up to be treasured by not just my family, but everyone around her. Wherever she went, she was adored and, when she became old enough, respected. She had a quiet but contagious smile that put anyone she spoke to at ease, and she knew how to carry herself with grace and dignity. Perhaps it would make sense if I envied her, but I didn't. She was especially sweet and caring towards her older sister, and we were inseparable. I picked her up from school. She went to college while I worked. We moved in together. We were so close that I could practically see what she was thinking just by looking at her. I prayed every night to the angel who brought her back. All was well until, during the winter 2 years ago, My father was shot dead in the back alley of our old neighborhood. My sister and I drove back immediately, while my mother wept at home. We braved a visit to the police station. They told us we couldn't see the detainee, but Maya insisted that we at least be granted that small favor. The man who had murdered our father sat in his jail cell silently. When my sister and I walked up to the bars, a ghost of a smile crept onto his pale lips. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. Maya turned away in disgust, as if she was done with her business. As soon as she did, the man locked eyes with me, winked, and mouthed something. I didn't catch what. My father's burial was held in a small cemetery 3 blocks down the road. It was mostly attended by family and friends, but there was an unfamiliar woman in a sleek black dress that my mother seemed particularly agitated by. The woman let a slender, white lily fall onto the casket in the frozen ground, and turned her pale, perfectly made-up face toward us. As soon as she did, our mother stepped to interpose herself between her and Maya. "Mrs. Allen," the woman said, her breath turning to white mist. My mother was usually a very calm and composed person, but there was a tremor in her voice when she spoke. "You," she said, "you're back. You seem surprised. I thought you would be expecting me." "I should have known," my mother muttered. "Is this it? The tragedy?" "Of course. I suppose the weight of a tragedy is seldom expected." And then the woman trailed off, her lips curling into a small smile. Tears had welled in my mother's eyes. I couldn't read her expression. It looked like a strange mix between anger, fear, and guilt. The woman eyed Maya, who glanced wearily between her and my mother, trying to make sense of their words. "I see that your younger daughter has grown up well." My mother stayed silent. "I would like to talk to her." Immediately, my mother's face blanched. You can't. "Mrs. Allen, your business is done here," my mother said, her voice now audibly shaking. A few heads turned to look at her. "You took your payment. Now leave." The woman looked disappointed. She turned to Maya. "Please come with me." Maya narrowed her eyes. "What's going on here? Why do you want to talk to me?" "There are people who wish to see you." "No," my mother said. "Maya, don't listen to her." "Mrs. Allen," the woman in black cooed, "you can't do anything to stop me." My mother shuddered and fell silent. The woman turned back to Maya. "Please." Maya grudgingly stepped forward. My mother and I followed. The woman frowned. "Please stay behind, Mrs. Allen." I carefully cleared my throat. "You may come with us if you'd like, Rose." "You know my name?" "Your mother has told me." I looked to my mother for confirmation, but she gave me none. Her face was ashen. "Come," the woman said. "We'll be back here soon." "Mom?" "Go," my mother said, with some difficulty. The strange woman led us down the street to the canal, where Maya and I often played when we were little. The flecks of snow melted into the dirt by the banks, and the murky water moved slowly. We walked along the waterside until the cemetery disappeared into the cold, wispy fog, and fir trees behind us. "So, what's this about?" Maya asked. The woman smiled lightly with her perfect cherry lips. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" she said to Maya. "You're a young woman now." "Who are you?" "The angel," I blurted out. Both Maya and the woman turned to look at me. "You're supposed to be the angel, right?" I said, shifting nervously. "The one who brought Maya back?" The woman smiled. "Is that what your parents told you?" We walked on to one of the ugly concrete bridges over the canal. The woman leaned against the railing as Maya watched warily. "What does that mean?" my sister asked. "Brought me back." I used to tell her when she was small and sick that she would be okay because she was loved by an angel, but she must have forgotten. I hesitated to tell her the whole story, as my mother had carefully avoided it ever since the first conversation she had with me. In the uneasy silence that followed, the woman laughed. It wasn't sinister laughter, but it somehow still made me feel uneasy. "Angels don't exist, Rose," she said. "I'm a simple businesswoman. Your mother called for my service, when your sister died. I felt myself stiffen. When I stole a glance at Maya, her eyes were wide. In the distance, the wail of police sirens filled the air. What services? I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. The woman reached into her black satin purse, pulled out a small black card with white lettering, and handed it to me. The Traders, it read. A miracle in exchange for a tragedy. What's this? My card, the woman said. Should you ever need it as well. My contact information is on the back. I flipped the card over. On the back was a phone number and an email address printed under a name. Anastasia L. Why are you giving this to me? I asked. What did you do for my parents? What does this have to do with Maya? The woman, Anastasia, smiled. The Traders consist of service providers for unusual requests, she said. Your parents' request was to bring their stillborn second daughter back to life. An impossible request, certainly. But part of our service is working with our client, a satisfactory alternative. My blood ran cold. Alternative? You don't think your mother would have liked carrying a child in her womb for 40 weeks and getting nothing but a corpse in return, do you? We decided to bring a child into your family's life that day, but as if your baby's sister hadn't died. I looked at Maya, and she looked at me. We were perfectly in tandem, always, because we were sisters, but she was blonde, always too blonde, and her eyes too blue, to have come from anyone in our family. Maya said haltingly, I'm not Mom's daughter? Anastasia shrugged. That depends on who you choose to accept as family, she said. In any case, it shouldn't matter anymore. If my fellow Traders have done their job, the woman who raised you is dead by now. What? The wail of police sirens hadn't faded, muffled ever so slightly by the fog. It was coming from the direction of the cemetery. A tragedy in exchange for a miracle, Anastasia said simply. That is our business. In exchange for creating a perfect family that lasted 20 years, we have come to watch you fall apart, one by one. Maya swiveled on her heels and began to run, back towards the cemetery, where our mother had stood with us just 10 minutes ago, but she stopped short at the sight of the dozen black-clad men who had gathered at the end of the concrete bridge. There's no reason to run, Anastasia cooed. It's too late to save anyone. And wouldn't you know it, your tragedy dovetails perfectly with my new client's miracle. The crowd of figures shifted, and I saw them, coming down the neighborhood streets to the waterside, walking hastily at first, and then running. A poorly shaven man with the brightest blue eyes, and a haggard woman with silky hair so light it was somewhere between blonde and silver. The numbness shattered, and reality hit me like a ton of bricks. Maya wasn't the tiny lump I had felt kicking inside my mother's round belly when I was 7. She was the baby girl I had waited to see in the waiting room of the maternity ward. There was no angel. There was no magic. Maya, our miracle, had been stolen by my parents and Anastasia. I stood and stared numbly as the man with the bright blue eyes ran up to us and swept my sister into his arms. The woman with the silky hair was crying, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks that dimpled just like Maya's. Our little girl, she sobbed. We finally found you. Close to my ear, there was a small metallic click. My muscles were stiff, but I managed to turn my eyes to Anastasia. In her hand, held up to my temple, was an ornate silver pistol that looked like it belonged to an antique shop. You are the last to fall, she said. Why are you doing this? I whimpered. It's our business, Anastasia said simply. The world can't be all miracles. I wanted to call for Maya, but my voice was stuck in my throat as I watched her get smothered in her parents' embrace. I wanted to call for my parents, but they were dead. If what Anastasia had told us was true, the Traders had killed them. My father was gone. My mother was gone. I would die too, and Anastasia's new clients would take Maya away. A tragedy in exchange for a miracle. I would have chosen to do anything else if I could. I really would have done anything better if the choice was in my control. But it wasn't. So I told Anastasia the only thing that came to mind. I want a miracle. I croaked. A smile crept onto her perfect cherry lips. What is your miracle, Rose? I want to live. Is that all? I want my family back. Anastasia chuckled, just loud enough for me to hear. What remains of it shall be yours, she mused. And let there be tragedy to my clients who wish for the miracle of being reunited with their stolen daughter. The pistol shifted away from my head, and with 2 swift shots, Maya's parents were dead. I only write about this now. I confess to you what I have done, because lately, I've become afraid. My payment is due soon. My tragedy is finally coming for me. My parents got 20 years after their miracle until they met their tragedy. Maya's parents got 2 minutes. The contract that Anastasia made me sign after my miracle mentioned nothing of a timeline. My tragedy would manifest whenever the time was right. It's been 4 years since the traitor spared my life, shot Maya's parents, caught my sister as she tried to run away, and brought her back to me. They had been waiting there knowing. Anastasia and the rest of the traitors are smart. Each of their services makes room for more. Maya's parents needed a miracle because their daughter got stolen away. I needed a miracle because I had to escape my parents' tragedy and get Maya back. The traitors are rooted deeply in the shadows of every part of society. I'm sure of it. Their connection runs deep, undoubtedly. That was how they kept my parents from police scrutiny after a baby was stolen from the hospital. Undoubtedly. Similar connections are at work for me. Even after police reports went public on the case of Lucas and Sarah Findebar, whose decomposing bodies were found in the canal some weeks after gunshots were heard in the area, investigators have never come to my door. I've got to think the traitors had a hand in that. Maya is smart too, and sometimes she makes it difficult for me to keep her in my basement. Just last week she tried twisting up a bent nail from one of the floorboards and using it as a pick lock. But Maya and we grew up doing everything together. Like I said before, I know exactly what she's thinking just by looking at her. She must know that I only want to keep us safe. Out of our family, biological or otherwise, she and I are the only ones left now. We need to look out for each other, no matter what happens. Yet she seems insistent on endangering me by letting the world know she's still alive. She keeps struggling to escape. But I digress. Last night, I saw a face staring at me from my second-floor bedroom window. Pale, smiling, knowing. The skittering noises in my attic that I told myself were just mice are growing louder and more frenzied. I think I hear my front door creaking open and closed sometimes in the middle of the night. My tragedy is coming for me. And now, as I hide under my moldy kitchen sink listening to the gentle footsteps creaking around my floorboards in the living room, I want to leave you with a final warning. There is a reason I didn't publish Anastasia's contact information. You shouldn't make a deal with the traitors. Any miracle isn't worth it. Not just the tragedy, but also the sheer terror that pervades your life leading up to it. The footsteps have ceased. Whoever it is, they're here in the kitchen now. They're pulling something out of the cabinets. The whetstone. I don't know how they figured out where I keep it. Even if you don't know how to contact Anastasia, I know the traitors will find you first. If you are in a position where you need a miracle, please just push them away. Save yourself the experience of cowering under your kitchen sink in your old family home and listening to a stranger sharpen a knife, so very slowly, on the countertop. Are any of you computer geeks? I certainly am. So much so that I've become an adept at computer coding and other things of the sort over the years. You're probably wondering who I am exactly, so I'll cut to the chase. I'm a 43-year-old computer tech who works off hire. My name is Alfred, and I live in a fairly small town. I won't tell you the name of the place to protect you. I'll be honest, for the vast majority of my computing life, I never once heard of the dark web. I mean, sure, I've heard bits and pieces about it here and there, such as kids jokingly saying, "Oh, have you been to the dark web yet? It's lit, bro." Personally, I always saw the proposed dark web as a place that would potentially have horror stories on it. You know, like the typical campfire stories you hear told while camping with friends, or even Boy and Girl Scout gatherings. What got me to look into it more was when a fellow technician, a friend in fact, told me something interesting on the way back home. Al, buddy, I just got off the dark web. It's interesting to say the least. I paused briefly, then said, "Really now? Did those annoying teens on the street get to you?" I said, with a teaseful chuckle, but to my surprise, he didn't say anything back. His face was pale, and he simply turned around and walked off in a hurry. I paused, confused at this point. Had I said something that upset him? Did he just remember his wife had something important scheduled? He is usually forgetful of those things, but it was different this time. I could feel the mixed emotions radiating off him like a pulsating heartbeat as he vanished on a turn a few blocks down the street. This prompted me to think for a moment, before sadly continuing on to my house. While walking, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me, as I had just done something seriously wrong. My gut feeling was blasting like an alarm inside me, causing my heart to race a little. I hoped my friend wouldn't resent me for being rude. Once I got back home, I walked up the stairs of my porch, unlocked the outside screen door, and proceeded to unlock my front door. While doing so, I felt watched, almost. It was indeed a creepy feeling. I looked around and saw no one, to which I shrugged, assuming it was just a neighbor hiding under their dark porch, observing me as usual. The lock on my door jiggled open, and I twisted the handle and entered my house. As soon as I walked inside, I felt my feet trembling out of being tired. It was typical for me, as I tend to work long shifts at the offices, ranging from 10 to 13 hours straight. I only work 3 days a week, and this was my last day for the week. On a Friday, I turned off the lights, unpacked my bag, and put the leftover lunch I had earlier that day into the fridge. I also changed clothes and got myself a hot shower before plopping down on my sofa and turning on the TV to see if I could find anything interesting on the news. Nothing. I sighed, shaking my head as I turned the TV back off and simply pulled out my laptop to browse the web. I typically watch YouTube to unwind after a long day, and it was my favorite pastime. While watching my favorite videos, I kept remembering what my friend and the teens said. After a while, curiosity finally got to me. I looked up on YouTube how to access the dark web, and I chuckled. "Oh, this is simple," I said. Within, I'd say, 5 minutes, I'd already bought and downloaded a secure VPN, anonymous viewer app to hide my IP address, with state-of-the-art defenses, and even threw in my own anti-malware and virus systems just to be extra safe. I need to clarify before I continue. Remember, I am an expert computer tech, and I know my stuff. I can set things up in a flash on any device involving phones, computers, or less common things like consoles. To clarify what I mean by consoles, I basically mean I sell modified Xboxes and PS4s. This may sound illegal, but I'm very well known in my workforce, and half the money I make modifying Xboxes and PS4s, with more powerful drives and better memory, goes to Microsoft and Sony respectively, as I have a part-time license with them that gives me the rights to modify consoles and resell them. If you know what you're doing, it's a good way to make extra money on the side, as the consoles can easily hit $1,000. Anyway, once everything was set up, I strapped myself in and began my dive into the deep web. But something was off. The screen had nothing on it. It was completely pitch black, no search bar, no addresses, no site domains. I was confused as this wasn't what I typically heard of. Did I bypass the system into the hard drive of the deep web itself? No, I couldn't have. The deep web has a serious coding process that even I can't break. But apparently, I did, as big red text popped up on the screen and said, "You shouldn't have done that." I paused in fear. At this point, my heart was in my mouth, and I couldn't even hear my own breathing. The screen said something else. "We see you." At this point, I was frozen in what felt like a statue made out of concrete over my body. I couldn't move, and worse, I was afraid to look away from the screen. There There was a window right behind the television, just in front of me. I was afraid to look up for fear I might see something. "Can you hear me too?" I said in a hushed tone. The screen didn't respond. At least, not at first. Then, in a flash, the screen said something else. "Look up." My eyes widened further than I thought possible. I could feel my eyes straining as I slowly peeled my head away from the screen. To my horror, I saw something in the window. At first, I couldn't discern what that thing was. In my front yard is a pole with a bright light on it. It illuminated a figure as black can get. The thing stood at least 10 feet tall. I know because my window was at least 8 feet up off the ground, elevated on a 4-foot stone slab. The creature's face was not like anything I had seen. The body was as black as tar, and thin all the way to the bone. It had long fingers, big enough to wrap around my torso. The eyes of the creature were gray, with what looked like red bars of code streaking through them in all directions like static. Every now and then, the creature's body jolted like static on the screen of a computer. And that's when the creature sprang into action. It broke through the window faster than anything animalistic or humanly possible, toppled over the TV, and got right in my face mere inches away from me. The creature's jaws unhinged, and a large gaping mouth was revealed with bright white teeth, that which chomped down on me, followed by my chilling screams of agony. I woke with a fright, and I found it was the next morning. I'd fallen asleep late apparently, and at first, I was under the impression it was all a dream. I felt relieved thinking that. I got up and made my way to the bathroom to clean up, only to realize I had teeth impressions in my left shoulder and on my right side, as well as claw marks here and there. I couldn't stop the feeling of terror as it hit me like a train. I ran out of the bathroom, and I saw my front window smashed, the TV still toppled over, and a trail of blood leading from the couch to my bed. I hadn't noticed it when I got up, or walked out of the bedroom until now. I couldn't move yet again. That's when I noticed something. The laptop was still on. It had been on all night, and as I walked closer, it read, "We are always watching." There's a stain on the hinges of the stairwell door. My father has tried to scrub it off, chip at it, pick at it. I believe he once struck a match at the dark, rusty spot, in exasperation. We both know it won't work. He does it anyways. With no heart to take out the door that's been there since the beginning. I hate that I can't tell him how it got there. It sears a burn into my peace of mind, but I know he can't learn about that night. It was in the middle of a cold front, the winds knocking at every gap and hole. In the midst of my hurry to stay warm, I had gotten that piercing, aching hunger, one most often experienced in the night. There, I walked out of the upstairs media room, calm as usual. For why wouldn't I be? Why wouldn't I trust the house I could dance through with my eyes closed? And yet, as I faced the stairs, lit by the buzzing warm lights, there was one of those awful thoughts that struck my drowsy mind. I'm going to die tonight. I heard, no, felt in my subconscious. The voice was neutral and cruel at the same time, sounding like steel, as those thoughts often do. It flitted away soon enough, but I felt the echo like blood after a bite of the tongue. Still, I walked, step by step by step. Deep breaths, slow your heart. You're tired, nothing more. Step by step by step. Turning the doorknob felt more like winding the clock to my tension, and with my nerves pulled taut, I saw it. The shimmer of something in the crack of the door hinges. No, not something. An eye. There was no possible way that anything else could gleam that shade of white, not with the lamp flickering behind me. Flickering. I rolled around, heart pounding. My lights never flickered. Why did they flicker? I shakily rubbed my eyes and turned back to the door. Nothing there. I'm not afraid. The dark is my friend. Done nothing wrong. I had wheezed to myself. Before marching out of that damn stairwell, fear shot through me like a bullet, to the point I made a break for the light switches. Was that the wind or an intruder? I thought when I hastily flicked those levers. My footsteps or someone else. Seeing illusions in the dead of night was common when you lived in the country. I had just put it out of my mind, pouring crackers into a bowl, when it suddenly occurred to me. The back door was open. It was a crack, a tiny detail, but it was open. In my house, we had built it to where the living room led to the back patio by a single door. Said living room was open, shadowy, and the nearest lights for it were beside the fireplace, also next to the back door. At this point, I didn't want to turn them on anymore. I was scared of what I would see in that empty den, so I crept, ever so carefully, to the side of the fireplace, not daring to look out the door, and then I pushed it shut. We're good, I breathed to myself, unsure of who we was. We're good. And then it opened again. It opened again. Several eyes stared back. This time, I could see myself, reflected in their hollow pupils. I stared. Have you ever looked at a copy of something badly written over, a crumpled footnote of the original concept? Have you ever seen one and thought, this feels wrong, and it shouldn't? Shouldn't. I felt that raw, primal instinct as the eyes blinked. It didn't belong. Not here, not anywhere. It tried to be something, tried to make morale out of that pure monstrosity. If I had looked at it further, it could have been something more than a tainted being. Something. I slammed the door shut, ignoring the howls and cries that weren't there. I couldn't tell if it was grabbing at me, pushing, clawing. All I knew was that it was staying on the other side. Why did it feel like I was warding off the embodiment of everything one could fear? The bowl was grabbed, the lights switched off, and I ran. There's a figure in the hallway. I told myself as the coats shifted in the draft. There's a claw reaching for my back, I thought as I felt for the doorknob. Not before a final act of peace, of desperation. I turned to the dark and tried to smile. These teeth don't feel friendly. Good night to all of those who live here, I had stammered out, terror wrapping its cold hands around my throat. Whether I know they do, or I nearly choked on air, or not. I locked the entrance and ran from the dark's welcome. There's a stain on the hinges of the stairwell door, and I make sure to bid it a good rest each night. My name is Jackson Picard. Have you ever looked out the window of your apartment complex, house, or the beach and wondered to yourself, what lurks in the deep? Well, I'm here to tell you somewhat. To get pleasantries out of the way, I am a professional diver who enjoys diving in the deepest parts of lakes, rivers, or even the shallower parts of the ocean. Free diving areas that typically go down to 90 meters. At least, I used to. This dive could only be done with a submersible. I'm sure you'll understand why later. When kids ask divers what their scariest or creepiest stories of the deep are, the divers aren't permitted by the government to tell what they saw. Many of my diver buddies easily agreed they never wanted to share such stories. I, on the other hand, think everyone deserves to know what is truly out there. I can't tell you the location of where my encounter happened, but I can tell you when. It was in the middle of September, I believe the 16th of 2016. This happened to me 3 years ago, and the experience is still burnt into my memories. I honestly can't believe I even survived. I won't hold back from this any longer, but please, bear with me. This story is hard to tell, and often leaves me traumatized just by remembering it. It all happened so fast. I was sent an email by my government employers to go out to an unmarked location. It was nearly 1,000 miles away from any major shipping lanes, and even further from the nearest landmass. I was told to not bring anyone with me on the dive, but when they told me the depth, I could scarcely believe it. 12,000 feet, the deepest dive I had ever done. And they were for certain I could do it alone. When I told them I would need a submersible, and at least one buddy with me, they actually cut me a break and allowed me to take one person, but no one else. The pay was huge, by the way. This next job would pay enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life. It was easily in the 8 figures, mind you. I was confused because such a payment is astronomical for one dive, and they considered it an appreciation fee. My job was to go down and investigate something. They never told me the details of this something, but they just said to dive straight down and we should be there by 3 p.m. So I called my buddy and told him the job. He couldn't believe it either, but he said he'd rig the boat and submersible in 3 days. He's a rather wealthy, professional diver. My trainer, in fact, who I've been friends with since college. His name is Walsh Gray. It's not a native name, because his parents just wanted him to be unique. I found it a cool name personally. When the day came to the deed, I packed all my gear up. Some food to last about 3 days for me and my partner, and a few distress beacons just to be safe. I hopped into my truck after putting everything in their appropriate places, and took the long 3-hour trip to the meeting point at the coast where the boat was. While driving down the narrow, bending roads, I couldn't help but feel nervous. I kept contemplating why my employers wanted me to venture into such uncharted territory, alone to start with. But even so, at least I wouldn't be going alone after all. It was right at 6 a.m. when I arrived on scene with my friend Walsh. It was still somewhat dark out and quiet, which is how me and my friend like it. We said our hellos and didn't waste time packing everything into the boat for the trip, locking our doors and such. We had a brief talk about how strange this job was, but it didn't stop us, as we had done some crazy things before together. By the time 6:30 rolled around, we were already 15 minutes out. We knew it would take about 2 days at most to complete the survey mission, since the location was 18 hours out. We had our GPS logged to the exact coordinates my employers gave me. We had a good trip there, filled with chit-chatting, drinking, sharing old stories, and even watching shows every now and then. We had enough gas for 5 days, so that wasn't an issue. For those of you wondering, we took turns piloting the boat every 3 or so hours, and we spent minimal time parked to sleep between travel time. The boat we were using could easily do 85 miles per hour, and it was very efficient on fuel. I never told my buddy Walsh I bought a satellite phone, just to be doubly sure we'd be safe. Turns out, we'd need it for sure. The next day we arrived at the diving location during the middle of the afternoon. Things didn't go according to plan time-wise, but we were still mostly on track. We readied the diving equipment ASAP, along with some food, the emergency beacons, and satellite phone inside the submersible. It was big enough for 2 people, with an open dome for observational purposes, but it was also very fast, with bright lights, and one that can be remote controlled to look around with a camera attached. We anchored to the bottom and hopped into the submersible, and began our descent into the blue void below. 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 3,000. It took 20 minutes to reach this level. Outside the dome we saw some strange fish, species we never saw before, and it was getting dark. So we took time to document them as new species, and even snapped photographs of them. Discovering new species easily netted a few 1,000 extra bucks in my work field, so we were happy to make extra money on the dive. 4,000 feet, 7,500, 8,000. At this point, we no longer saw the creatures from before, and the only other light besides those in our submersible were those of bioluminescent origins. I never understood how these creatures could survive down here in the dark depths of the ocean. It was downright creepy, the way they glided ever so softly around the dome before vanishing into blackness above us. We continued our descent. 8,500 feet, 10,000, 12,000 feet. "We're here," I said, as the bottom came into view. We were traveling slowly at this point to avoid crashing into the seafloor. "Alright," said Walsh. "Let's see what we can find down here, Jack." He murmured somewhat excitedly. However, his excitement quickly left him, and we noticed a submarine of military origin. Our mouths dropped open, not just in shock but disappointment. As I said, "Is this why they sent us down here? To investigate some old World War II submarine?" I said in an annoyed tone. Walsh, however, wasn't so amused. "Let's go around to the other side, see what we can find," he said sheepishly, to which I agreed with an annoyed expression on my face. We moved cautiously around to the other side, keeping our lights on the submarine. Man, it's huge, isn't it? I said as Walsh responded in a teaseful tone. What? Never saw a military submarine before? You're such a novice. As I annoyingly humored his comment. Let's report back. Walsh stopped abruptly, his face turning pale. What? I said, to which he simply pointed to the submarine. I looked at where he was pointing and my mouth dropped again, but this time, not out of annoyance, but fear. We saw a giant claw mark on the side of the 300-foot long submarine. They were massive. One claw mark was easily 60 feet wide, and there were 3 deep impressions across the sides of the submersible. What? What the hell? What on earth could do such damage? I said, startled at what we were seeing. It's gotta be fake. The scale of the creature that did this would have to be monstrous in proportion. I think this was put here just to scare us. Walsh responded back, stuttering. That's when I heard it. A loud, piercing screech. But it was also guttural, and loud enough to shake the ground beneath our submersible. This startled and terrified us out of our skin, but once it stopped, we recomposed ourselves. That must be what we were sent to investigate, I said in terror, barely able to utter the words calmly. Yeah, must be, Walsh said terrified, but that's when we noticed something. The ocean floor wasn't at its deepest. We turned more to the right and turned on our long-range sonar, to which it illuminated a very deep drop-off that went down 11 miles. A very massive trench, bigger and deeper than even the Mariana Trench. We were both mortified at what we saw, and the sound came from down there, but that wasn't all. We set our lights on high beam, and in the distance, we saw something we will never forget. A massive creature, easily 500 meters long. Its face was crocodile-shaped, with 4 rows of long, sharp, and jagged teeth that glistened in the lights of our submersible. Quick, we need to get out of here now, I said loudly, to which Walsh responded with a full throttle up and out of the region. I quickly turned off the camera as we rose, and I could swear I heard the thing in hot pursuit. And sure enough, it overtook us and locked its massive jaws around the submersible. It began shaking us around and crushing at the glass. Our submersible was armed with bright flares, so we fired off a set hurriedly as the bright light stunned the creature and actually caused it pain, enough to release us. Its guttural shrieks were terrifying and horrific, like a very low vibrating ice sheet dragging along the seafloor. It was only then that we were released from certain death, but I needed to see what exactly that thing was. I swung the still working remote control light around, and there it was. The creature had a long body, massive and bulky. It was as pale as snow, and covered in ridged scales and spikes. Its tail was massive, twice as long as the creature's body, which made up most of its incredible size. The tail was barbed with massive spikes and tendrils. Tendrils it no doubt used to drag ships down into the abyss. The scariest part, however, was the eyes. It had so many eyes, all massive and pitch black with a massive white pupil. They looked as if they were staring right into my soul, and as the creature left my sight, it let out the most terrifying, guttural roar I ever heard. A roar that still caused me to wake screaming at nights, even to this day. I don't remember much after that. It was all a blur. We were able to make it out by the skin of our teeth. Last thing I remember was Walsh dragging me out of the water and leaving behind the damaged submersible as it sunk to the bottom, along with all evidence we had even seen such a creature. I will never forget that monster. It still haunts my memories even now. I can honestly say that. There are things in the ocean that should never be discovered. To all of you young people reading this, never go out to sea. Never go diving too deep. Never expose yourself to the horrors of the deep. I will never go deep sea diving again. The church door was open. I had made a point to visit these grounds every time I came back to visit family, which, admittedly, was fewer and farther between over the years. The door was never open. The church itself had fallen into disuse before I was born, but had been constructed somewhere in the early 17th century. I knew the exact date at some point, perhaps some general knowledge I'd imbibed through school, but it had fell out of my mind to make room for more useful information. I never knew why it still stood here though. Perhaps superstition, the act of digging up and relocating the graves, must have been a morbid prospect. Times now pay less heed to the fantastical or supernatural, but I imagine back in the 80s, when religion had a much stronger hold on thought and actions, people would rather just leave it be than disturb the resting dead. Maybe it was left because they considered it blasphemy to deconstruct a venue that was built for God. Though, I didn't see much of a difference between active demolition and abandoned dilapidation. Or maybe the reason was purely fiscal. Maybe the governing bodies wouldn't siphon any of their budget. Our town was hardly a jewel in the country. Into hiring a firm to raise the church, level the ground, agree on what should be erected in its stead, so on, so forth. All conjecture, of course, but it wasn't my place to dwell on. I just like to come by here and think. It was surrounded by fields that rolled and melded into one another so perfectly, it almost seemed serendipitous. A lake coursed through the center of the vast green in a meandering journey, and 3 metal bridges had been placed equidistant to join both sides of the green that the river innocently sundered. This all, as if wishing to be kept a secret, was enshrouded in a bosky wilderness that could be home to anything from mites to the homeless, for all I knew. I'd never venture into there, neither from want or need. To get to the church there was a little path, wide enough for one car, that cut off from the main road, which led from the train station to the quaint town center, and entertained a gentle curve before rejoining a smaller road, which in turn led back into the main one. The path had a canopy of trees towering above it, so even in the daytime, it would appear dusk, and I loved it. I always felt like, religious or not aside, that veering off into this path was like stepping foot into the past, a different, simpler world. It was wonderfully romantic, and always put my mind at ease. In essence, this place was quite sequestered from the complications of modernity. I'd walk through, make my way in the church grounds, and find a place to sit. The stairs leading up to the main church entrance, an indent in the church's structure itself, though it was usually mossy and muddy, or littered with burnout trash. Or fight my way through the thicket of trees, and place myself on one of the small shrine-like structures, their aesthetic tainted and marred by unceasing seasons. Once seated, I'd read a new poem for a book of poetry my grandfather gave me before he passed. Always kept it, never read it, until the idea came on my first trip back when I found it sitting in my bookshelf, before going on to read whatever novel had won my fancy. Just a chapter, just an hour, that's all I needed. It rejuvenated me on a level that it almost felt as if it was calling me, and I was happy to heed that call, a developed symbiosis. Though I'd been swimming in my ocean of neutral, half-lazy agnosticism, I believe there must be something, but what that thing may be, I couldn't even hazard a guess, for nigh on a decade. I didn't come to the church for any religious reason, but mostly because I enjoyed the different world I'd created on the canvas it presented. There was a newer building, should I have been seeking some enlightenment or forgiveness, in which for some reason, the powers that be, divine or not, had decided to transfer that holiness of this place to. It was smaller, true, and staggeringly less impressive, but it was clearly much cheaper to upkeep, to hire, to heat in the winters. I found that bewildering. I'd been brought up to believe that God, the very power this church was erected for, had commanded absolute, unquestionable omnipotence. Yet with all that possibility at his behest, with the philanthropic wonders or devastating judgments the Bible claimed he had committed, he couldn't extend any of his unlimited might to keep one building safe, warm, steady. And so, a building that had boasted over 300 years of joining lovers in holy matrimony and comforting them in grief decades later when one of them were lost, forgotten, welcoming newborns into the very faith it existed for, and healing the heartache of any stricken by the cruelties of the world, abandoned. A wonder that constructed by our ancestors long gone, who were buried in these very graves, and though their blood ran through us, they were good as strangers, betrayed. I didn't realize until the door had transfixed my gaze began to shimmer, but I had been crying as my mind wandered. There was no logic behind the forming of my tears. It was just an open door, but it seemed so tragic, so awful. It was all I could do to keep my mind wondering about how many tears that others had shed here, from either despair or delight. Enough for an ocean, I'd wager. The eroding gravestones didn't escape the plummet into irrelevance, as if tiny static planets dotted about the sun. When it dies, they too cease to matter. The etched names and messages of loves had been nihilistically effaced, so that all that remained were crude dents. The names the stones once displayed had families, somewhere in the haze of history, emotions, likes, wants, aspirations, and now a worn-down stone whose only job was to remember them had forgotten them too. The grass, wild and unruly, swayed without resistance in the sporadic zephyrs. It covered the entire grounds, clumping in mounds here and there, and leapt up against the gravestones, the church, and the myriad trees. Light and weedy as it was, I imagined it with a stronger gale. It would swish and sway like turbulent waves. Speaking of the trees, the mighty soldier oaks who accepted the duty of shading the graves from harsh summers had now crept into their twilight, their leaves bushy and unkempt, and donning a crisp autumn red. They stood guard, in their final years, watching over the saplings and younger trees who would, as is the circle of life for all living things, soon stand in their stead. Vines of ivy crept up and around the church, their thick girth sniffing, searching, and finding nooks that my eyes could not. They would latch into it, anchor a support, weave an ostentatious loop before catapulting off, scaling further up the wall like expert climbers, and reaching such a height that they had knit a blanket over the slated roof, permitting only small patches of evidence for what lay beneath, nature tending to what humanity shrugged off. The church, in turn for the patronage of the vines, had permitted them entrance through the stone window frames in which the stained glass had either been carefully removed and refused, or cruelly smashed and shattered. Either way, the vines cared not. They gushed over the base of the frames, grabbed and pulled from the sides, and ducked under the tops, pouring like a bizarre waterfall of tangles. And so too did my tears still pour. I felt a profound pain ebbing at my heart, crying for attention, crying for me to recognize it, but I couldn't understand. It didn't make sense to me what was happening. I found the entire idea of religion had been humbled in one scene. This whole acceptance by millions that religion was, is, and always will be the be-all and end-all. This very sight offered challenge to it. It disclosed the truth that God, gods, any divine being, is only powerful and relevant when people decide it to be the case. A montage of images through my travels took precedence, and flitted by so quickly, it was difficult for me to process. Ancient temples I'd visited, old shrines, statues that had survived the ages, monuments carefully transported from consecrated grounds to the entrance of museums, war-damaged cathedrals, carvings, or halls hewn into mountains. Tales and traditions, soul and superstition half remembered. These weren't the produce of gods, but the inventions of humans. In the very absence of pious care and reverent footfall, nature, without doubt, would always win out. Should we all die right at this second, the gods that we decided had shaped our world, wonders and sunders, would all die with us. And in our absence, the fields we guarded, the forests we fought back, the parks we tamed, they would grow, encroach, venture forth, and assimilate without mercy, but so too without malice. I shuddered a deep, sorrowful sob. These gods, we home them in our minds, not these manifestations of faith. Our thought was their pantheons, to the gods we were born into, and the gods we learned from dead civilizations. They died with them, in the books, in the garments, commandments, rules, pious practices, and prayers, and parables, all had been wrought and cooled within the furnace of human thought. As I watched it burn, a crow, if the glimpse I managed was to be believed, fly into the open window and settle in the vines before dancing from foot to foot and hopping within, as I realized this collection of stone and wood had now been claimed by lesser creatures as a home. I felt a change within. A gust of wind rattled at the bleeding leaves of the elder trees, and they hissed their vehemence to my change, or perhaps they were whispering their agreement. But as they fell to the floor and plummeted from the safety of lofty heights to the wilderness below, so too did the remnants of my wavering faith. I felt compelled to walk up to the door and peer within. It lured me in like a silent siren, as if offering to satisfy this void. I wished to bear witness to what had become of such a place. The door itself shifted and blared, still through my bleary, teary eyes. Each step I felt colder, more alone. I'd never experienced such a sensation in my entire experience of life. I glanced back to see the main road in the distance, with cars drifting up and down like ants in their hill. Nary a care in the world for the macro scale, each caring only about their own minor lives, trivial issues, and goals, as if one day they, too, won't grind to dust, the quintessence of us, and be forgotten by all living and existing. I couldn't return to that now with such a queer loss stemming from the very place I would come to mourn, or cling on to. I climbed the last of the few steps and realized the inside of the door had a series of queer patterns around it. Vandals, I assumed. Stars and circles, triangles and strange symbols that looked as if they could be Norse or Greek, a form of hieroglyphics, or some strange language. And all around these markings, as if framed in lacerations, a series of sharp, concise scratchings cut deep in the rotting wood. For a second, I thought I felt another gust of wind conjure an army of goose pimples upon my flesh, but I soon realized this chill came from within. I took a step inside the vestibule and could see all the way up to the sanctuary. There was no one giving a sermon, yet a congregation of Derridus held attendance in vain anticipation. Weeds had commissioned emissaries to spread their influence wherever possible, clawing through every crack the stone base had conceded over time. Ubiquitous, unruly, merciless. Of the wooden pews that remained, all of them were rotting away in soft white blooms, or had become a banquet for undiscerning termites and woodlice. I felt a sardonic smile curl at my lips. God in all his providence. Most of the pews, like everything else, were completely broken. Whether by time or human, it was unclear. About the old walls, there were some slight, faint discolorations. All were so similar in the likeness that I deduced they must have had fixtures bolted down, which had evidently found patronage elsewhere, one way or another. Wind burst in from the empty window frames, and worried at my hair, seeing as there were no candle flames to flutter and gutter. An immense loneliness had all but stolen me, and embraced me to the point of constriction, being the only human to walk within, and even then, feeling like a trespasser. Yet, I walked on, up to the crumbled, chipped, and podium, lacking finery and rife with graffiti. It was odd to look back from this vantage point, to see rubble and dust, planks and splinters, and rubbish. All that rather than divinity and order, perhaps a reflection of the tatters of my own faith had been left in. I could hear the scuttled patter of scrabbling rodent foot and nail on stone, rather than the hushed whispers of a pious audience in waiting. Unsure as to why, I laid my bare hands on the stone before me, feeling an inherent chill below the layer of dust and dirt, and like a pretender, a tourist to a land I once had a home in, I crossed myself, and I spoke. "The Lord be with you," I said. Strange, there was no echo as would be expected, which I assumed must have been due to my voice fleeing through the windows rather than the rebounding about the bare, cavernous wall and arched ceiling. Though, in answer, a series of startled darting took place from the hidden animals I heard before. I smiled wanly, in spite of it all, and made to step down. And with you, I heard a muffled, subdued chorus respond. A collection of disembodied voices, each barely more than a whisper. I stood rooted in my advance, frozen in terror-stricken paralysis. After a godless approach, my wits returned to me, and I tore my eyes from the ground, so as to discern where in this echo of a once great building the sound could have emanated from, but was offered no explanation, no answer. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread and anxiety, clawing within and without, trying to steal what was left of my hope. Everything within was telling me to seize, but I wanted to speak on, to check, but whether I would have or not, the voice had diminished in shock, and only hushed squeaks could be heard. The squawk of a crow broke the spell, and relinquished me from the ethereal, or panicked hold. I fled, sprinting straight down the aisle, and feeling the irony of 100 unseen eyes on me. Whether conjured from my own thought, or evidence in devout specters, I was uncertain. To further my panic, I heard concerned mutterings as I sped. Twice I stumbled in my haste, first kicking a rock I hadn't seen, and second, after my footfall landed upon a loose piece of wood that rocked and jolted under my weight. Both times I heard a cry of panic, a yelp of shock, perhaps an echo to my own, or something more sinister, otherworldly. I didn't pause my flight until I was down the stairs, out the grounds past the graves, the image of an army of spirits standing, watching beneath that crimson canopy, judging me in my madness, roared at my peripherals, but my tears and desperation blurred and distorted them. I scaled the small wall and didn't slow my pace until I was on the aforementioned main road. My muscles were complaining, my lungs stinging, my heart stabbing at me. I dared to glance back toward the church, and to my surprise, I could see the door was now closed, though it was clear I hadn't paused in my flight for such a consideration. Though I hadn't quite recovered, through my fear and spontaneous exhaustion, had not been remedied by this rest, nor quelled by any logic I grasped for. I heard, like the faint wisps of dusk, the distant and harrowing melody of a church organ, and thus I turned to resume my retreat. I may have lost my religion, but thereon, an afterlife seemed an inescapable doom. Yet I ran, godless, hopeless, confused.